Good morning, all of you. In the last lecture regarding esophageal diseases, we have covered the motility disorders apart from achalasia, and that is diffuse esophageal spasm and other associated diseases, along with diverticular diseases of esophagus. Now we'll quickly go through the non-neoplastic conditions of esophagus, and in the subsequent interactions we'll discuss with carcinoma esophagus. So in this interaction we are going to discuss non-neoplastic conditions of esophagus. We have already covered the motility disorders of esophagus. So let's start with just enumerating various non-neoplastic conditions of esophagus. Broadly speaking, we are having almost 7 non-neoplastic conditions of esophagus. The most commonly discussed. There may be some other, but we are going to discuss only the 7 non-neoplastic conditions of esophagus, and they are Sazaki's ring, the various esophageal infections like Candida and other infections, the Chagas disease, the Crohn's disease affecting the esophagus, the Chagas and Crohn's. The esophagus is involved as a part of disease spectrum. After that, the Plummer-Vinson syndrome, various vascular abnormalities associated with the esophagus, the mediastinal fibrosis that is involving the esophagus leading to symptoms. So these are the basic, broadly discussed, the 7 non-neoplastic conditions of esophagus. Let's start with Sazaki's ring. Sazaki's ring, basically this is usually present in distal part of the esophagus. A circular ring is there, and the usual site is squamo-columnar junction, where the squamous epithelium of lower esophagus is joining the columnar epithelium coming from the cardiac end of stomach. So squamo-columnar junction, this is the usual site where this Sazaki's ring is usually seen, a circular ring. There is strong association with gastroesophageal reflux disease, and usually the core of the ring that contains variable amounts of fibrous tissue and various cellular infiltrate on microscopy after taking biopsy. It's look like this. You can see this arrowhead. This is the esophagus, the proximal part. This is the distal part, and this constriction sort of thing, that is known as Sazaki's ring. Most rings, usually whenever we are going for endoscopic examination in any symptomatic patient for some other disease, we are usually going to find this Sazaki's ring most of the time. So this is usually an incidental finding. As such, these rings are asymptomatic itself, but the patient is presenting with some other disease, let's say gastric ulcer or duodenal ulcer, and we have planned that patient for upper GI endoscopy, and in that scenario we are going to have Sazaki's ring sometimes. Very few cases the patients, they present with dysphagia, difficulty in swallowing. And usually these patients who are symptomatic due to Sazaki's ring, they respond to dilatation, endoscopic dilatation. As and obviously we are going to prescribe anti-reflux therapy, the medical point of view. The medicines, proton pump inhibitors are prescribed, and other supportive treatment is being given along with endoscopic dilatation. This is a treatment for Sazaki's ring. Next group comes as esophageal infections. Now in this group, esophageal infections, basically the most important thing is the patients are usually immunocompromised. Then only esophageal involvement is seen most of the time. And fungal and viral infections are very common in these patients. Bacterial infections of esophagus leading to esophagitis, bacterial esophagitis, yes, we may see, but this is very rare. The most common is fungal and sometimes viral infections. These two are common in especially in immunocompromised patients. So, since these two group of infections are very common, so we are having the first thing is that is Candida albicans esophagitis. After that, we are having herpes simplex virus and cytomegalovirus esophagitis. So let's start with Candida albicans esophagitis. These group of infections, as we have already discussed, they are common in immunocompromised patients. So in the same line, the Candida albicans esophagitis is usually seen in patients who are taking steroids for some other disease, chronic basis. So these patients are, they are supposed to have this type of Candida albicans esophagitis if patient is presenting with dysphagia or odynophagia, painful swallowing. So especially seen in transplant patients, as you already know, transplant patients, they are supposed to take long-term steroids. And another group is the patient who is undergoing chemotherapy for some neoplastic conditions, for downstaging or as a part of treatment. So these two groups, the transplant group of patients and chemotherapy for malignancies, these two group of patients, they are usually on steroids. So Candida albicans should be ruled out if the patient is complaining of dysphagia, right? So how to rule it out? You can go with the clinical presentation, the clinical examination. On history, the dysphagia or odynophagia complaints, and on examination, visible thrush may be there in the throat. Yes, we can go for endoscopic examination, and usually it shows numerous white plaques. And the important thing is these plaques are immovable, cannot be moved. Whereas if that is a food residue, it can be moved on endoscopy. This is how we are going to differentiate between a white plaque and a food residue during endoscopy. Usually the biopsy is a diagnostic. Take the biopsy and send it for histology, and microscopic examination usually reveals these type of infection. This is how the esophageal candidiasis looks like. You can see the whitish patches, the plaques. You can see all of the almost esophageal wall is involved, and these patches cannot be moved during endoscopy. They don't change their position. So this is endoscopic appearance of esophageal candidiasis. In severe cases, sometimes a barium swallow may reveal the mucosal ulceration and irregularity. And why we are discussing this barium swallow suggestive of mucosal ulceration and irregularity? Because one of the differential diagnoses for this picture, the similar picture, we can see in esophageal varices. So one of the differential diagnoses is esophageal varices. Take the history of alcohol intake and other similar episodes of uh, hematomasis suggestive of esophageal varices. So how can we differentiate between these two? That is an amazing study of barium swallow, and this one we can, both the conditions we can differentiate on endoscopy, upper GI endoscopic examination. What is the treatment of this candidiasis, esophageal candidiasis? Topical antifungal agent after confirming the diagnosis. Very rarely, yes, we will have to use systemic therapy, the antifungal also. But the usual treatment is topical antifungal agent as the patient is immunocompromised. The herpes simplex virus and cytomegalovirus infection. Again, the immunocompromised patients, usually these infections are seen. The usual complaints, the dysphagia and odynophagia, difficulty in swallowing, and odynophagia is painful swallowing. In herpes simplex virus patients, there is history suggestive of herpetic lesion on lip usually. Few days back, on if we have planned that patient for endoscopy, upper GI endoscopy, that will reveal us the various vesicles or sometimes small ulcers with raised margins, and these ulcers or vesicles, they are usually seen in upper half of esophagus in case of herpes simplex virus. The candidiasis, a different scenario. Herpes simplex virus, a different condition. Herpes simplex virus usually seen in upper half of esophagus. Cytomegalovirus, usually seen in graft versus host disease in patients of bone marrow transplantation, and the classical, there is geographical or serpiginous border ulcer is there, and in both the cases herpes simplex virus esophagitis as well as cytomegalovirus esophagitis, the endoscopic examination and biopsy is, that is diagnostic. We can make the diagnosis clear, the biopsies, and accordingly we can manage the condition. We are just discussing the various differential diagnosis, that is non-neoplastic in origin affecting the esophagus. Few of the treatment we are discussing, few of the treatment depends upon the condition of the patients. So next condition after esophageal infections, the Chagas disease. Usually in the viral infections, esophageal infections, the supportive treatment is given. Antiretroviral therapy or antiviral therapy can be given along with the other supportive treatments. So after finishing this Sazaki's ring, then esophageal infections. Now the third one is Chagas disease. Now this Chagas disease is basically seen in South American countries, limited to that part of the world. But why, if that this condition is limited to only South America, why do we want to know about this condition in India? This question, the answer is because the esophageal symptoms suffering from this Chagas disease is almost similar to the presentation of severe achalasia. So only for this differential diagnosis, we would like to know about this condition also in India. The Trypanosoma cruzi, a protozoan usually transmitted by an insect vector, and it leads to Chagas disease. These parasites, they reach bloodstream, and after several months they present and how do they going to affect the patient? They usually damages the cardiac and smooth muscles, and they also destroy the orbex and Meissner's plexuses, and finally the end result is acquired megaesophagus. So this is again important from PG point of view. So one of the cause of acquired megaesophagus, the large esophagus, the dilated esophagus, megaesophagus means large size. One of the causes Chagas disease. Now, what is the treatment of this Chagas disease? There are two phases, the acute phase and chronic phase. In acute phase, benznidazole and nifurtimox, these are the two drugs should be given. The contraindications for benznidazole we must know, that is pregnancy, liver and kidney failure. So pregnancy, liver and kidney or renal failure. These are the three important contraindications for benznidazole. Now for nifurtimox, the very important contraindication is if patient is having some neurological disorder or if patient is on some antipsychotic treatment. So in these two conditions, avoid using nifurtimox. In acute phase we are discussing. In chronic phase, obviously two options are there. First of the thing is the lifelong medications we have just discussed, that is required, along with the symptomatic relief by doing appropriate surgery for megaesophagus. Now the fourth condition is Crohn's disease affecting the esophagus. In symptomatic Crohn's disease, usually the abdomen is the area, the small intestine is usually affected, sometimes very rarely the large intestine, but usually esophagus is not commonly affected. In 20% of the patient, the esophagus remains asymptomatic, no symptoms, no dysphagia, no adenoplasia. But if we are going to plan the patient for upper GI endoscopy and if we are taking the biopsy will reveal that this patient is suffering from Crohn's disease affecting the esophagus. This is seen in 20% of the patient. Usually the patient is complaining of severe retrosternal pain and dysphagia. So one of the differential diagnoses will be GORD, gastroesophageal reflux disease. GORD versus Crohn's disease. Why? Because the patients, they are clinically presenting with severe retrosternal pain and dysphagia. On endoscopy, there is extensive esophagitis. Esophagitis means inflammation of esophagus, as you already know. And the important thing is extending more proximally than reflex esophagitis. Means in patients suffering from Crohn's disease, endoscopy is suggestive of extensive esophagitis in larger area, extending more proximally. Distal, the lower portion is involved, but it is extending towards the middle portion of the esophagus when compared to reflex esophagitis, where the involvement is almost usually largely limited to the lower esophagus. So in Crohn's disease, there is extensive esophagitis as compared to reflex esophagitis. This is the difference on endoscopy. The Crohn's disease versus GORD. Biopsy is usually diagnostic, but usually that shows the presence of non-specific inflammation. In patients with chronic presentation, in severe cases, sometimes deep sinuses may be there and fistula formation do occur. The symptomatic Crohn's disease, they respond poorly to medical treatment. Sometimes we will have to dilate the strictures associated with Crohn's disease with balloon dilatation. And if there are multiple internal fistulae, then surgical resection is recommended. We will have to excise these fistulae and repair it. Surgery is required in these cases. The fifth one is the Plummer-Vinson syndrome. Again, very important as far as your PG point of view. This Plummer-Vinson syndrome is also known as Patterson-Kelly syndrome or sideropenic dysphasia. Sideropenic dysphasia means iron deficiency anemia along with difficulty in swallowing. And why there is difficulty in swallowing, that is dysphasia in Plummer-Vinson syndrome? This is due to post-cricoid web. And as we have already discussed, this is usually associated with iron deficiency anemia, glossitis, and koilonychia. I hope you all know these three terminologies: the iron deficiency anemia, glossitis, and koilonychia. Glossitis, inflammation of tongue; iron deficiency, you already know; koilonychia, related to nails. These three important things, they are rarely seen all together. So very rare presentation. The patients are usually not seen having all the three components together at a time. Oropharyngeal leukoplasia, if that is associated in these patients, if that is seen in Plummer-Vinson syndrome patient, it means there is increased risk of hypopharyngeal cancer, and for this patient must be investigated and the counseling must be done for the risk of hypopharyngeal cancer. So always go for upper GI endoscopy and take the biopsy if suspected. The webs are usually present in upper part of the esophagus or middle part, usually not seen in lower part of the esophagus in Plummer-Vinson syndrome. And in contrast to that Sazaki's ring, the Sazaki's ring, if you remember, that is usually present in lower part of the esophagus, whereas this Plummer-Vinson syndrome, this web is usually present in upper or middle part of the esophagus. There is thin diaphanous membrane, and on contrast radiology, again an incidental finding it could be. What is the treatment of this web? To solve the problem of dysphasia, do the upper GI endoscopy and just rupture it. And very few patients, they require the former, the endoscopic dilatation if structure is associated with it. The next group of condition affecting the non-neoplastic disorders of esophagus, these are vascular abnormalities affecting the esophagus. Just to enumerate few, there could be congenital vascular anomalies. Usually the patient present with dysphasia, and these congenital vascular anomalies, they compress the esophagus from outside externally. The most common one is the presence of aberrant right subclavian artery, also known as arteria lusoria. And sometimes the double aortic arch, the vascular rings, they are compressing the esophagus from outside. The condition is double aortic arch. These are congenital vascular anomalies, arteria lusoria and double aortic arch. They may lead to presentation of dysphasia. Dysphasia is usually seen in few cases only, and the most common age group affected with vascular abnormalities affecting the esophagus is childhood or sometimes late teens. What is the treatment? Surgical division of non-dominant component of vascular ring. Non-dominant. The major supply should be saved. The non-dominant component of that vascular ring should be divided to release the compression. In adults, usually the acquired causes are there, and the causes could be the aneurysm of aorta, the diffuse cardiomegaly, and esophageal compression due to presence of left common carotid or vertebral arteries. And usually in adults, the symptoms are not severe, so surgical intervention is rarely justified. We should not go for surgical intervention in adults suffering from vascular abnormalities, what we have enumerated, compressing the esophagus. Usually the symptoms are mild one, so don't opt for surgical intervention in adult age group. If these conditions are present in, let's say, early childhood or teens, yes, surgical intervention should be done. And finally, the mediastinal fibrosis. The mediastinum that is involved with the excessive proliferation of fibroblast and mediastinal fibrosis. Usually these conditions are rare, but yes, this may occur alone, or sometimes the mediastinal fibrosis is also presenting as a component with retroperitoneal fibrosis, cause we don't know at present. And but yes, drugs like methysergide, I hope you know methysergide is used for, yes, this methysergide is used for vascular headaches, or let's say migraine in common terminology. All of you know that. This methysergide drug, one of the side effects is mediastinal fibrosis. Again, this fibrosis is compressing and involving the esophagus from outside and leading to the various symptoms, dysphagia or adenophagia. In these type of patients, in the mediastinal fibrosis involving esophagus, the major consequences, the complications is usually cardiovascular. Why cardiovascular? Because the superior vena cava is usually involved, or sometimes inferior vena cava, leading to dysphagia. The fibrosis is involving all these sites. Usually in these type of patients, the cardiovascular problems are irreparable. We cannot repair. So usually no intervention on esophagus should be done in this condition, even if the patient is presenting with dysphagia. And that is all. We have discussed the various non-neoplastic disorders, the 7 disorders. The commoner one we have discussed, affecting the esophagus leading to dysphagia. So we have covered with the various motility disorders, followed by non-neoplastic disorders. Now in next interaction, we'll go with the neoplastic, that is malignancy of the esophagus, the carcinoma, esophagus, benign and malignant disorders. So thank you for your patience. Any query, yes, you can write to me in the specially created WhatsApp group for 2016. Any problem, you can write your questions there. So thank you.